Amen. Y'all can grab a seat. There's a new preacher in town. Her name's Eden. No, I'm kidding. This is my daughter, Eden. She's 5 months. We call her Sweet Eden, or Sweden for short, but she's not Swedish. And so I don't think, at least. I don't think we're Swedish. Anyways, but this is Eden. I don't know if you guys know this, but at 5 months old, she's extremely reliant on us, like for everything, right? Like she's like looks so cute like this, but she didn't dress herself. She didn't get these clothes, none of that. And she's actually not helpful at all in us dressing her. Like it's like, she's just like laying there. Like it's like, if you could at least push your arm through. She didn't even do that. It's a struggle. But anyways, and also for eating, she doesn't, she can't find her own food. She can't get her own food. She relies on us to get her food for her, make her bottle, and even that, she can't even feed herself. Like even if you give her the food, she needs you to hold the bottle the whole time. Then you're doing the airplane thing with the spoon, and you're going through. It's a whole thing, right, sweetheart? And so getting dressed, eating, clothes, all that stuff, it's just like she is totally, totally reliant. So I wanted you guys to get a picture of that sense of total reliance. So I'll give her back to her mom. And then we've got a picture of my daughter, Gracie. She's 4 years old. That's Gracie. I know. They're all completely adorable. They look just like their mom. Can we give it up for Kristen, by the way? We do have an honorary 2-year-old in the middle of there. His name's Haddon. He's crazy. But anyways, but then there's Gracie. And honestly, the cool thing about Gracie is at 4, she seems way less reliant. In fact, she can dress herself, which she takes advantage of that 4 different outfits a day, okay? She just goes up and changes. It's ridiculous. So she can dress herself, super, super helpful. I'm sure she showed up in the outfit that she picked out today. But the thing about Gracie is that she needs us to wash her clothes and to buy her clothes. And so she doesn't understand, but all those little outfits she's tried on, eventually those go down the hamper, and we've got to wash them, and we've got to dry them, and we've got to fold them, and we've got to magically put them back in her drawer that she goes through every day, right? So she is less reliant, but still reliant, and she can eat on her own, which is super, super helpful. We don't give her a bottle, obviously. We don't have to feed her. She can feed herself. Matter of fact, I did a wedding yesterday, and Gracie's kind of my wedding date now, and so I'm in my suit. She's in a sweet little dress. She's got her hair done up, and she's holding a cheese stick in her hand. Okay, so anyways, it's memories, right? But she is great at feeding herself, but she needs us to cook the food, to do the whole thing, right? She's still reliant. So seemingly less, but still reliant. What about me? Well, I'm 29 years old, married, have 3 kids, pastor this church. It's a joy. Am I reliant? Well, I want to just impress you guys and let you know that I actually can make my own food, okay? Peanut butter and jelly. Eggs every once in a while. All right, I'm decent at those, okay? Those are my go-tos, all right? Literally, if like Kristen's gone and I'm making the kids food, they're getting peanut butter and jelly, okay? Like that's just it. That's my own. I don't even know how to do grilled cheese, but I can make something, okay? I can survive. I can slide something in the microwave. We're just fine. And so you go, oh, that's awesome, man. I can feed myself too. But I am currently reliant on some random farmers all across the state and the nation to farm this produce and to harvest it, or for ranchers, whatever, to grow up whatever animals they're doing and slaughter them and process them. And then I'm relying on the truck driver to drive into Lincoln, Nebraska to the Hy-Vee over here on O Street and unload them. And I'm relying on the workers to grab those and load them in. I'm reliant on my card to go through when I try and pay, right? I'm relying on a lot more than just I can do this, and I can dress myself. I chose this outfit. I'm pretty proud of it, to be honest. But again, I'm reliant on somebody somewhere making and stitching these clothes together, and I'm relying on H&M having them, and whatever it might be, right? There's so much to it, and you go, okay, so you're less reliant, but you're still reliant, huh? What about Warren Buffett? Warren Buffett, one of the richest men in the world, 110 billion with a B net worth, okay? Wildly wealthy. Is he reliant, right? He's reached the pinnacle in a ton of ways of that. Well, right now, Warren Buffett is currently reliant on his heart to keep beating. He's reliant on doctors to give him the best medical advice. He's reliant on his vitamins to do what he thinks that they should do. He's reliant on family members to come and visit him. He can't just live on his own and crunch numbers and sift through investment opportunities. He's reliant on all of that, right? So here's the concept that I'm trying to draw out. Whether you're 5 months old or 4 years old or 29 years old or I don't even know how old, 80, you are reliant. You never stop relying. That needs to sink into this reality of you never escape reliance. You never graduate from it. You never grow out of relying. And in every circumstance, you have three options for reliance. You get three choices of who or what you're going to rely on. Number one is God, right? And that's the hope for every believer is that we rely on God. Number two is yourself. You can choose to rely on yourself. Or number three is other people / things. You can choose to rely upward, rely inward, or rely outward, in other words. And so we're going to look through 2nd Chronicles. And if you're just joining us, we're in a Heart of God series we do every summer for about 6 weeks. We're doing it for 11 years. We're 3 years in, and we're just studying, going through 6 books of the Bible in a row in order to give our church an overview of the wholeness of the Bible. This isn't meant to be exhaustive. This isn't meant to be like, oh, I know 2nd Chronicles now. This is meant to dive you in deeper so you get a context when you read it for yourself. But we're in here, and we're going to study a guy named King Asa. So if you got your Bibles, open them up. 2nd Chronicles, we're just going to be in chapter 14, 15, and 16. I know we normally study a short thing, but we're going to go through. You'll have an understanding of these 3 chapters. So if you got your Bibles, anchor them there, open them there. We're going to be moving around these 3 chapters in 2nd Chronicles chapter 14 through 16. And we're specifically going to study a guy named Asa, King Asa. And in 14, he has one of the sweetest stories of relying on God and God coming through. I love it. It's a beautiful story. We'll study it together. But then unfortunately, in chapter 16, he's thinking that he's outgrown reliance on God. He's graduated from it, and he chooses to rely on himself and others. And we might want to point fingers at Asa and go, bro, get your life together, dude. Keep relying on God. But this gives us a sobering look into our own hearts, doesn't it? Our own propensity to have these sweet moments of reliance on God, and then as we move forward, we stop relying and start relying on ourselves and others. And so here's the main point that I want to drill in, is that you never stop relying on something. So never stop relying on God. You never stop relying on something, so never stop relying on God. Now, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ethan covered 1st Chronicles last week. They're a story and a narrative like a roller coaster, and it's mostly low lows, and it's just king after king, and they're terrible. There's so many terrible kings, and yet we get a glimmer of hope, and there's some great kings. And thankfully, I think that King Asa, the guy we're going to study, is actually, although he doesn't really end well, I think he's still in the good king category. And so if you look at 2nd Chronicles 14, just look at verse 2 with me. It says, "And Asa did what was good and right in the eyes of the Lord his God. He took away the foreign altars and the high places and broke down the pillars and cut down the Asherim and commanded Judah to seek the Lord, the God of their fathers, and keep the law and the commandment." So the 2nd Chronicles wants us to know Asa's a good king. Dude came in and he didn't, and so many kings will come in and they'll build up idols and they'll build up all this and they'll push people away. But Asa's going, no, we're going to seek the Lord. This is what my kingdom is going to be about, is about God. It's really, really beautiful. And God brings peace. He blesses it and freedom, and it's awesome. And if you look in verse 8, it says, Asa had an army of 300,000 from Judah, armed with large shields and spears, and 208,000 men from Benjamin that carried shields and drew bows. All these were mighty men of valor, right? So hey, in this season of peace and God blessing King Asa because he was faithful to God, he builds up an army of about 500,000 people. That's awesome, right? But there's bad news because other surrounding places are looking and they're getting jealous of what's happening through Asa. There's no war, there's prosperity. And so if you look in verse 9, it says, Zerah, the Ethiopian, came out against them with an army of 1,000,000 men and 300 chariots and came as far as Maresha. Okay, so you're tracking the story. Asa's reign is great. Everything's going good. He's got an army of about 500,000, and some dude from Ethiopia is going to go against him with 1,000,000 people. Now, remember, this isn't like modern day, I have a secret weapon, mass destruction, bombs, anything. This is like you have a sword and you have a shield, and that's all. And so what that means is on a battlefield, all your battle is against one-on-one. Like it's chaos. You picture like Lord of the Rings, you get these two armies mashing together, Chronicles of Narnia. There's this reality that they all come together, and it's just you and another person. And once you defeat them or they defeat you, they go on to another person. So you get what I'm saying here. In that season, the primary metric for if you would win a battle is how many people you had. It wasn't even the quality of people. It was just they're outnumbered. So it doesn't matter if an elite soldier is up against two JV soldiers. It's hard to beat two people at the same time, right? And so there just became this reality of like, if you have 500,000 and the Ethiopians have 1 million, you're going to lose. There's no option. There's no great strategy. There's no secret weapon. You're just going to lose that battle. It's not good. And that's where King Asa is. And the question becomes, well, what is he going to do? And we'll go to that in a second. But I just want to ask you personally to inflect on this. What do you do when life seems impossible? When you're outnumbered, where do you go to? When there's no simple answer or solution or whatever that may be, where do you run to when you're outnumbered, when there's an army of 1 million in front of you and you clearly are going to lose and it seems inevitable? What do you do? Now remember, you never stop relying on something. And you can either choose to rely on God or yourself or others. And so I just want to process through those options. And I just want to pause on our story and go, what would it look like for us in this scenario of facing the impossible to rely on ourselves or others or God? And what would it look like for Asa? So here's your 3 options. Number 1, and we're applying this to Asa, but we're also inflicting on our own life. Number 1 is I can rely on myself. And to be honest, I think that if we're looking at a pie chart of our lives, this is a dominant reality, is we rely on ourselves so much. We rely on our power, our ability, our resources, our relationships. We rely on our wisdom. We look at a situation and go, man, this is hard, but I could pay for that. I can solve that. I've got insurance. Whatever that may be, we look at a situation and go, man, this is hard, but I think I can muscle my way through. I think I've got the resilience to conquer this, to complete this, to do this, whatever it may be, right? I can leverage my influence here. I have this person who knows this person. We can get a doctor appointment to fix this, and whatever it may be, we can rely on ourselves or our wisdom too. Of just like, I've been through this before. I've lived some life. I know how to solve this. I've got this, right? There's this reality where we love to rely on ourselves. We want to be the hero of the story of whatever army is in front of us that we need to beat. And so here's how it would maybe hypothetically play out in Asa's life, if this were to be what he does. Now, again, we haven't read the next verse, so let's just say we could rewrite this, right? For ability, and he's got all the resources, right? He's a rich king. And so he actually goes, if this was hypothetical, he's going and he has 500,000 more swords and shields and spears made, okay? He gets them all made and welded, and it's great and awesome. We've got that. And then he goes through and he leverages his political power and influence and makes a law that every able-bodied man, he does a draft for all the small towns. He goes through, does a campaign, and everyone who is able is going to be in the army. But he's not just a ruthless king, guys. He's doing a signing bonus and you get a $100 Chick-fil-A gift card. Okay, so it's at least kind of good that way. And so okay, that sounds great. And so now he's doubled his army because he's recruited everybody that can hold a sword or spear or shield. And so he's got 1 million people in his army. That's awesome. But he's going, man, I've got to think through. And so he goes, opens up the history books, and he goes, how have kings beaten big armies before? How do I take out the Ethiopians? What are their weaknesses? Where are they going to tend to fall or fail? And he comes up with the perfect plan. He goes, this is going to be amazing. And so he grabs his Bluetooth speaker, and he turns on his pump up playlist, and he turns on Eye of the Tiger, and We Will Rock You, and Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down. And he's just ready. He's like, I'm relying on myself. We're going to do this thing. And boom, that's all he needs. He had everything he needed to face this people in and of himself. And that's the option we have on a daily basis, to say, do I have it in me to fight this thing, to handle this thing, to solve this problem? That's option 1. Option 2 is I can rely on others, which again, you're looking at a pie chart. I don't think it's the biggest, but it's another big slice in the equation of who we rely on or what we rely on. And so what we do here is we know, actually, I don't have it in me to solve this thing, but I think the people around me do. I think the things around me do, and I think that I can invite them in and they can solve my problem. So we're looking for identity. I don't know who I am. I don't know if I'm valuable. And we go to other people. Hey, would you affirm me? We go to social media, would you like my post? And I get that spark of like, oh, this is who I am. I'm liked or I'm loved or whatever. We're looking for rest. I'm really tired. I need rest. I can't find it on myself. We turn on Netflix or the TV. I need joy, and we go on trips or vacations. I need spiritual food, and we turn on a podcast or listen to our favorite preacher. I need peace, and we look at our life insurance or health insurance or home insurance. I need hope, and so we look at our pay stub. And for some of you, that actually might not bring hope, looking at your pay stub, but some of us look at our pay stub for hope. I'm looking for sustenance, right? And we look at, I work out though, and I'm healthy, and I have medicine and vitamins and doctors, or I need a plan, and we look at our politics or our voting. All of this is looking outward because we can't look inward, and so we look outward to try and do whatever we need solved. Whatever problem we have, whatever need we possess, we look outward and we try to pull it in and say, can you do this for me? That's the other option. So let's play this out in Asa's life. Hypothetically, how would this look if he were to choose to rely on others? Now, knowing that his army isn't big enough, and he actually has drafted everybody that's draftable, he reaches out to the king of Moab. Now, if you look at a map, Moab is a bordering country, and they have a king that's ruthless. He loves battle, and so he bit at that opportunity, said, yep, I'm going to be all in. And now at that time, the king of Moab brings into to Judah and Benjamin, and they go, hey, we have 1 million people now. So hooray, that's it. But King Asa isn't super confident that he has the wisdom in himself to make that plan. He doesn't know how to study the history books or the strategy against the Ethiopians. So he calls up the best military strategists in the world. They all come in. They have, you know what I mean, the movies where you have the big, like, built-out scene. They're like, what are we going to do? And they're moving the things around. And they're like, this is it. And he's like, oh, that's a golden plan. Thanks for coming up with that. That sounds great. And he goes, but now I got to communicate the plan to these 1 million people. I don't know how to do it. He's not a great public speaker. He failed that in college. And so he calls Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Okay, he says, dude, I know you know how to get a room hyped. Can you come in and can you hype these 1 million people because we need to beat the Ethiopians? We have a great plan. So Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson comes in. And boom. Everything he needed, this 1 million person army that he could never do on his own, he relied on other people, and that would be the way that he could potentially win, right? Option 1, rely on yourself. Option 2, rely on others. Option 3 is actually by God's grace what he chooses to do, which is I can rely on God. So look at verse 11. Look how it continues. Verse 11, and Asa cried to the Lord his God, O Lord, there's no one like you. Between the mighty and the weak, help us, O Lord, our God, for we rely on you. And in your name we have come against this multitude. O Lord, you are our God. Let not man prevail against you. Instead of relying on himself, his power, his ability, his wisdom, or relying on other people, their resources, their whatever, he chooses to rely on God. Why? Because that's the best option. That's the only option. He goes to God, the God of the impossible, the God of infinite power, the God that controls and has never lost a battle, the God that cares, the God that's close, the God that fights for his people. And it says in verse 11 that Asa cries to the Lord. So I'm trying to draw this out, like what does relying on God look like? And it specifically says that he cries to the Lord. Now that phrase, that statement actually gives an imagery of a baby. Like think of Eden crying out to us because she needs help. Now, for parents out there, you guys know this, moms probably especially, that the babies have a specific cry for specific things. Like it's crazy, like Eden will like cry for, hey, I have a poopy diaper, or I'm tired, or I'm hungry, or whatever it may be, and Kristen's like, oh, that's a tired cry. And I'm like, what? And she's fluent in baby cry, okay? It's like a crazy thing. But that's all Eden knows how to do is cry for whatever she needs, and she can't do it, and so she just cries. And there's a discerning or a deciphering of like what kind of cry is she employing right now, right? This is the imagery we get. She cries, I need a diaper, more milk, a nap, snuggles, whatever, but she just cries. Now in 2 Chronicles, in chapter 14, King Asa, a powerful, mighty, beloved king that's leading an army of almost 600,000 people, cries to God like Eden cries to Kristen and I. Take that in. The humility that it would take, the awareness personally it would take to say, I'm not a self-reliant person. I'm a God-reliant person, and I'll never escape that reality. And he cries to God. And so let me ask you this personally. Do you see yourself before God like a helpless baby crying for help, or like a know-it-all teenager that can handle it on your own? How do you see yourself before God? Like Eden or like a 17-year-old? You know what I mean? It's like, my brother is 17, so I know exactly how that looks. Do you frequently cry out for him to help, or do you try your best to figure it out on your own? King Asa knew there was a sweet invitation from God to come. There's a sweet invitation to ask for help, and his father would step in. He chose to rely on God. And look what happens. Verses 12 through 13, look how the story plays out. Chapter 14, verse 12. So the Lord defeated the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah. Notice this is the Lord defeated them, not Asa and Judah. And the Ethiopians fled. Verse 13. And Asa and the people who were with him pursued them as far as Gerar, and the Ethiopians fell until none remained alive. For they were before the Lord. They were broken before the Lord and his army. The men of Judah carried away very much spoil. God provided. And he proved to be reliable, right? But for a second, just think about the after party. Like this crazy, unthinkable victory. Think about the spoil and the drinks and the food and all this stuff. Nobody's lifting up King Asa going, bro, you're the best king we've ever had. You're awesome. No, Asa's somewhere off in the corner. They're praising God. They're shouting on God because he was the one who beat the Ethiopians. He was the one who showed up. And thinking about King Asa, he's not walking around with swag. Yeah, I did it. I got my plan. I leveraged. No, he's just on his knees. God, you did it. There's no other explanation than you just did it. And there's a humility and a gratitude. But this is the end result of total reliance on God. Is humility, is joy. He gets the glory. Right? It's a really beautiful story. So that's chapter 14. And then look in chapter 15, this guy named Azariah comes. And so look at verse 15, verse 1, and we'll go through verse 5. Chapter 15. The Spirit of God came upon Azariah, the son of Oded, and he went out to meet Asa, and he said to him, hear me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Lord is with you while you're with him. If you seek him, he'll be found by you, but if you forsake him, he'll forsake you. For a long time, Israel was without the true God and without a teaching priest and without law. But when in distress, this is key, they turned to the Lord, the God of Israel, and sought him. He was found by them. In those times, there was no peace to him who went out or to him who came in, for great disturbances afflicted all the inhabitants of the land. Okay, so Azariah comes in, and it feels like a buzzkill, doesn't it? You're like, bro, just celebrate, okay? Here's a lamb chop. You know, it's like something like, this is crazy. And yet he comes, he says, no, I have to say this. God had spoke through him and said, you just relied on God, and it was so beautiful, but you need to know you're going to be tempted to turn from him tomorrow. Don't forget this moment. Don't forget the Ethiopian victory over the Ethiopians. You're going to be tempted as you move on to forget and not be reliant. You're going to be tempted to seek other things and not him. And so he says, this is awesome. Take it in, but don't forget this picture. Take a picture of it and put it on your dashboard and remember that God is reliable, that he showed up, and don't stop relying on him. It's beautiful. And so they double down, they make a covenant to God, they sacrifice a bunch of animals to just communicate, God, we trust you. And so let me ask you this. Can you think of a 2 Chronicles 14 moment in your life? Can you think of a time when God did the unthinkable? When God blew you away by his grace and reliability? When he showed up and there was no other way for victory? When he provided and you felt like all that would be is loss? When he did the unthinkable. For me, I thought of so many things, but specifically, church, I thought of you. I thought about this church. My wife and I lived in Omaha about 5 years ago, and I was leading worship at Citylight Church in Omaha, and Kristen was a teacher, signed her contract for the next year. We bought our nice little home in the suburbs. We furnished it, got a puppy. We were ready. We were going. It was awesome. We had great friends. And Mr. Chris Oreska right here and Gavin decided to take me on a walk and say, hey, would you want to plant a church in Lincoln, Nebraska? There's a group of people coming. We think that you and a guy named Moser Dixon could be the team to go plant a church in Lincoln. And for about a month, we were like, no, and we were prayed, and God just led us. And so we were like, but what are we going to do? Because there's no sense of control. We're totally reliant on God. What are we going to do about our house that we just bought? We're in for 30 days. We hadn't paid our first mortgage yet. And then a couple from the church said, hey, we heard you're moving. We want to buy your house. No hassle, just asking price, here you go. Oh, that's so huge. Lincoln Market's always crazy. We found a house a couple days later, offered below asking, they accepted it, right? It was just crazy. And we're like, okay, so hey, Mo, hey, Colleen, hey, Chris Gavin, we're in Lincoln. What's going to happen? Well, hopefully people show up to church. And so we're planning and we're praying. We're just relying on God. Where are we going to meet? People love that question. Where are we going to meet? Well, just so you know, the church isn't just a meeting place. It's the people, you know what I mean? And it is important to find a space. And then the Monday before the Sunday we first met, we get the keys to this building for free. There's Momo and I. Crazy, relied on God. We just gave the answer, I legitimately don't know. All right? We might be in a parking lot somewhere or in a park. I'm not sure. And God gives us this building. Awesome, so we got a building. Are people going to show up? Oh, people showed up, right? Over 300 people come up the first Sunday. It was mind-blowing to see God's grace. Okay, awesome. We got a building. We're here. People are coming. But we're not just interested in packing out seats. We want to see people get saved. We want to see people get baptized. We want to see lives transformed. Oh, by the way, God's been reliable. Over 250 people have been baptized in the last 5 years. That's crazy. That's amazing. He's doing that. We're like, whoa. And it's just God. It's on him. He's done it. And that's awesome. People are getting saved and the church is growing. But we don't just want to make disciples. We want to multiply disciples and send church members. I wonder if he'd ever send missionaries through us. I wondered if he'd ever plant a church. If you guys didn't know, in the last 5 years, we've been able to plant 3 churches, one in South Lincoln, one in North Lincoln, and one in Fort Collins. It's amazing the story God's relying. We've sent missionaries, and so many of you are raising up as global missionaries of the global vision, and he's getting ready to plant new churches. It's awesome. God's been reliable. It's crazy. And listen, we, especially during the kind of school year, we're so packed out. We've needed a building. We don't have very much money. And one of the guys in our church, Doug, pulled me aside afterwards. He's like, just want to let you know that God is still reliable. If we need a new building, he's going to do it. It was like this kind of thought of like, hey, and for me, this is a picture perfect example. Oh, God's been so reliable. Let me tell you the Citylight story. And yet I think that it's on me to get us a building or for me to do the next. It's like he's done it all. Why would I think that he'd stop now, right? It's just, and so he reminded me and convicted me after the sermon. I'm like, okay, dang it, that hurts. But listen, what is it for you? What's your 2 Chronicles 14 battle against the outnumbered Ethiopian? What's your story? What's the thing that God did that you just went, I just can't believe he did it? Hopefully you got a lot of things, but what's coming to mind when you think about God doing the impossible, God showing his reliability and his faithfulness to you? You need to hear me say this. I'm convinced through these verses that our biggest problem is not believing that God is always reliable. Our biggest problem is believing that we're always reliant on him. You tracking with me? Our biggest problem isn't believing that God is reliable. I think that so many of us believe that. But our problem is believing that we're currently reliant on him right now and next Wednesday and 2 years from now, that we always have this deep thing. And this is where King Asa goes wrong. As we see in the story, again, he thinks he's outgrown reliance. This is where we go wrong. And he experienced God firsthand. He saw the miracle before his eyes. That wasn't the problem, right? The problem was looking forward, not looking backward and seeing his reliability, but looking forward and believing that we're still reliant on him, right? And friends, I see this concept play out all the time in our lives. Okay, so just to be clear, there was another battle that we were hopeless to win. Relying on ourselves or others just wasn't an option, far more impossible than facing an army twice the size. And the leader of this army against us, he makes the Ethiopian king look like an helpless infant. This leader is ruthless, and all he wants is to steal and kill and destroy. And he's had thousands of years to perfect his deceit and train his army. And then there's puny old us. I mean, we're hopeless, right? Like, we're shaking in our boots. There's no armor, no real way to put up a fight. And yet against this unbeatable foe, for some reason, we try our best to beat him. And have you ever seen like where there's like someone tall and like a little kid and the kid's trying to swing and the person just has their hand on their forehead, right? Skylar always does that to me, okay? And he's just like this and I'm trying to swing at it. It just doesn't work, right? But, you know, and it's just like you're just swinging a wind. Like you're not hitting anything. This is what it looks like for us to go up against this ruler, against this leader, this deceiver, this father of lies. And yet we just keep swinging. And so we swing the sword of our morality, our spiritual resume, our sense of goodness, our religion, and it doesn't even scratch the surface. And then we go and we throw a punch of our self-help books that we've read and our favorite motivational speakers, and it misses completely. And we kick with our commitment to get better and try harder, and all of it, we just fall flat on our face. Nothing works. We can't rely on ourselves to beat this one. We can't rely on others, but another king comes in. And he doesn't have a sword or a shield or clenched fists. He just has a cross. No battle strategy or army to accompany him, just a joyful willingness to be killed by this enemy in your place. It would be a trade. You get life and he dies, but he's happy to do it because there's no other way for you to live than for him to die. He wasn't motivated, by the way, by your goodness, and he wasn't deterred by your badness. He wasn't committed to you because of your promise to get better, and he didn't withdraw from you because of your propensity to keep messing up. And the only thing he asks for is that you would definitively lay down whatever you were using to fight and let him fight for you. That you stop trying and start trusting just simple faith. And who is this king, you might ask? His name is Jesus. And the scandalous offer is on the table for each and every one of us to rely on him. And the Bible calls this the gospel, which means good news. And it's how we're saved, by trusting what Jesus did for us, not what we can do for ourselves. And that battle, by the way, was so much greater than the battle with the Ethiopians. Jesus defeated Satan and hell and sin and death on our behalf. This is what saves us, total reliance on God. But we can never do this. But track with me. This is what blows my mind. For some reason, we believe in the scandal and the free, beautiful gift of the gospel. And as we start walking with Jesus more, we think that the pendulum swings and he got us in, but it's our job to keep us in. Oh, I'm not growing very much. That's on me. I need to be more responsible. I'm not experiencing freedom. I need to get my life together. I need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. What? Are you serious? You think the gospel is this beautiful story of God defeating this foe that you just fell to and just swung and missed every time? And yet that beautiful gospel is hindered by this, well, now it's on you. He got you. It's like the gospel isn't some scam where you pay the first couple months and it's free, or it's the first couple months are free and then you start paying. Jesus died to freely save you, and he died to freely sustain you. He died for your salvation and your sanctification. He didn't only just die to get you in heaven, but to transform you daily and to sustain you until that moment of glory where you meet him. You need to understand he doesn't just get you in and leave you alone. He's with you, and you're just as needy and you're just as reliant through 20 years of walking with Jesus as you were 20 seconds after trusting in him. There's no difference. And yet we constantly fall. And so listen, I don't think our biggest problem is believing God's reliable. Our biggest problem is believing that we're always reliant on him. It's not the ABCs, it's the A through Z. The gospel is not a puddle we admire and jump over. It's the sea that we sink in moment after moment. And so I want to show you how this played out in King Asa's life as a sobering reminder to guard from this in our own lives, right? So now let's go to chapter 16. Now remember, this is fresh off of a miracle. This is fresh off them making a brand new covenant. I mean, life is good. This is great. Here's what happens in chapter 16. We'll read 1 through 6. In the 6th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah. Now pause real quick just to give you some context. Israel is the northern tribe. Judah is a southern tribe, and those two things kind of have a rivalry, right? And so Baasha is seeing what's happening with King Asa, and he doesn't like it. And so here's what it says. It says he went and built Ramah, and Ramah was a kind of an in-between place, and he went there and he fortified Ramah, and it's saying basically that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. So he wants to stop people coming in and out, right? Stop the trade route, whatever. Verse 2, then Asa took, again, actually pause. Here's the option that he's faced. Again, remember when we stopped in chapter 14 against the million-person army? What option is he going to choose? Himself, others. God, here's the option point, and here's what he chooses instead. Verse 2, and Asa took silver and gold from the treasures of the house of the Lord and the king's house and sent them to Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, who lived in Damascus, saying, there is a covenant between me and you, and there was between my father and your father. Behold, I'm sending you silver and gold and De Leon's burritos and Bitcoin, and go, here's just some gifts, but if you want to, go, break your covenant with Baasha, king of Israel, that he might withdraw from me. And Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent the commanders of his armies against the cities of Israel, and they conquered Ijon and Dan and Abel-Maim and all the store cities of Naphtali. And when Baasha heard of it, he stopped building Ramah, that place was supposed to be fortified, and let his work cease. So that's a huge victory. But verse 6, it goes even further. And then King Asa took all Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah and the timber, things that the king of Israel paid for, all these building materials. And it says instead, they built the Geba and Mizpah. And so it's a huge turnaround. At one point, Asa is on his own, and the king of Israel is trying to attack him. And then he grabs this guy from Syria. His Syria attacks. The guy withdraws. So it's a huge victory. He pressures off his back, and then he goes and takes all the building materials and builds new cities. Friends, this is a crazy win. This is a crazy success. This is like goes down in the Hall of Fame of king moves. Of he played chess and he got it right? It's a beautiful story. But then look what happens in verse 7. And at that time, Hanani, the seer, came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you relied on the king of Syria and didn't rely on the Lord your God, the army of the king of Syria has escaped you, right? So you relied on yourself, and look what happens. Were not the Ethiopians and Libyans a huge army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, he gave them into your hand. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward him. You have done foolishly in this, for from now on you will have wars. And it says that Asa was angry with the seer and put him in stocks in prison. So track with this. Asa's like popping champagne. This is awesome. This is crazy. We just won. And this dude, Hanani, comes in and says, dude, you blew it. You might have won, but you lost. Did you not remember in chapter 14 when God beat the Ethiopians for you? And did you not remember what Azariah warned you of? And then this very thing, you leverage your gold and your silver and your political influence and you win. It sounds great, but you've done foolishly. And now you're going to have a lot of wars, man. Now you've lost that. It's this whole thing. And in that moment, he also has an option to repent and see that humbly, but he doesn't, and he gets angry, and he puts this guy in prison. It's a bummer to see that walk through, right? And his resistance to reliance doesn't stop. If you follow through chapter 16, look down a little bit, verse 12. In the 39th year of his reign, Asa was diseased in his feet, and his disease became severe. Yet even in his disease, he did not seek the Lord, but sought help from physicians. He's just totally moved away from reliance, which, by the way, should humble us to say, just because you relied on God at one point doesn't mean you're relying on him now, right? Like the greatest can fall the hardest. And so you look at this. But here's the question that I'm wrestling with. I was just banging my head against the Bible going, what happened? Like, what determined Asa to rely on God with the Ethiopians, but not with the Israelites, or not with his disease? Why did he rely on God and them, but not with these? And the same question for us. What determines if we rely on God? What factors or variables decides who we rely on? And as you look at his life, my best understanding is the concept of control. The main variable in looking at who we rely on is our concept of control, whether or not we have any control. And so if you look in there, I'm just going to separate these briefly and quickly into three categories, and they're in progressive movement of control. And so number one, you have the impossible. This is where you're outnumbered with the Ethiopians 2-1. There's no control. You don't have any ability, right? And here, when we have the least control, we're the most prone to rely on God, okay? We're going to track through these. So the impossible. What would this look like? My friend Andrew, one of my best friends, planted a church right around the same time as we did. And he has kidney failure, like terrible, terrible kidney failure, almost died. His kidneys are functioning, I think, less than 16%. And it's just a super bummer. He's my age. He has 2 kids, married to his wife, Bailey. We love them. It's impossible. And he's going, I need a kidney transplant. The doctor's saying, you're not up on the line enough. Like, you're too young. There's this whole thing. And so if you wait for the normal kidney transplant thing, you will die before you get a kidney. Your only option in this impossible scenario is that you find someone willing to give you your kidney, and they match you, which is a huge thing. And so he announces it to his church, and a guy named Josh, who him and his wife were a part of Citylight and moved to Omaha, and he goes, hey, I'm a universal donor. I'd love to see if I match. And he's a match, and Josh is going to give him his kidney. Isn't that amazing to see? But it's just like, and they relied on God, and we prayed like crazy. My wife and I had tears in our eyes, just weeping, begging God, laying our hands on Andrew and saying, God, heal him. You can do it. We relied on him. He chose not to heal that way, but he's healing through a different way. And this guy, Josh, giving up his kidney. And it's a huge story, but it's the impossible. It's like these are the areas we're prone to say, God, you can do this. Or maybe it's getting pregnant in the midst of a long season of infertility. I mean, I know it's so common for so many families in our church are walking through this. And there's a family, a part of our church, that could not get pregnant on their own. There was some realities that just wouldn't make it possible. And so they did IVF, in vitro fertilization. It's a really expensive procedure, but they tried. They said we're convinced that we should have a kid. They did 9 rounds of IVF, and half of them failed, and half of them they got pregnant. But in all of those that they got pregnant, they lost that baby through miscarriage. And they were just mourning, and they're relying on God. Would you do this? What would you have? They're just begging, and they're going, I just think we're done. We're just not going to have kids through biological birth and stuff. And so some of their friends rallied together money, and they said, we're going to provide you one more shot to IVF. And it works, and they have a little boy that's 2 years old now. And they have a little baby on the way right now. I mean, it's just, you know what I mean? But you get to spaces where it's impossible and there's no other option. You don't have control. And you just go, God, you're my only, you have to show up, right? You have to go. And then the second option here with the concept of control is the impressionable. The impressionable. This is the second option. So for Asa, this is when the king of Israel comes to fight him. And he goes, look, there's some level, impressionable means there's an ability to influence or sway. And so as he looks to this impressionable scenario, he goes, I think that I could leverage my money. I think I could leverage my political influence. I think I can beat this thing on my own. And so there's some level of perceived control here. Not as much as just normal things, and not quite as little as no control. But there's something. So this is like you're applying for your dream job or your dream school. And your sense of but I can kind of control that my resume is legit and it's super spruced up and it looks awesome. Or maybe you have marital strife and your marriage is rough and you're going, you know what, we can read this book, we can go to counseling, we can figure this thing out. I think we can handle this thing. I think we can control this thing. Or maybe your kid has a learning disorder and you're going, but we can afford the best tutor in town and we can increase our focus on teaching. Or maybe it's a potential sickness or a pandemic and you're going, we can get the vaccine and then we'll be good. And again, there's still a variable. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad, but there's a level of this is a scenario that I have some ability to impress or to influence or to control, and we're there. And the last area is the inconsequential. You have the impossible, the impressionable, and the inconsequential. And so this is the end of chapter 16 where he gets a foot disease. And it says he doesn't seek the Lord, he seeks doctors. It's almost as if he just thinks it's routine. Like he just looks at it like as a normal, random, insignificant thing. It ends up taking his life and he dies. But nonetheless, the inconsequential are these things that are normal, ordinary, and expected. Routine doctor checkups that we just go to going, yeah, just whatever, or driving to work or flying on a plane or your monthly budget or your expenses, things that we just assume will go as expected. But hear me say this, as our perception of control increases, our willingness to rely on God decreases. In other words, when we can't rely on ourselves or others, we rely on God. Or to say it another way, in the most honest way I can say that, God is often our last result of reliance. Only if and when we feel like it's our only choice, when we have no other option, when we've exhausted everything we do, he becomes our last result. But you have to wonder, is that what God wants? You think God's literally like, oh yeah, I'm so happy that you relied on me. It took you 7 options you filtered through, but I'm really glad. No, it's heartbreaking. And if we've never played basketball before, you don't ever want to play basketball with me. But once a year, we go with the Citylight pastors to Florida, and Chris and all the guys are like, let's go play basketball. Crazy A, you drain threes on the court. I'm like, no, I don't. I shoot threes, but they never drain. And they're like, come play with me. And so we go to the court, and they're like, all right, that's cool. Thanks for coming out, Austin. All right, let's pick teams. And I'm like, all right. And I'm standing there, and they're going through, and he gets picked, and he gets picked. I'm just standing there with another dude. He's 50 years old. I'm like, They're like, I guess we'll take Austin. You know, it's like, dude, that's the most deflating thing I've ever experienced. I'm not playing basketball anymore. I'm just saying, um, but that's what we do with God. Like, think about this. Think about being a team captain, lining up all your options, going, I don't know. I guess we'll take you because you're the last option. Got to fill up our team. It's just so heartbreaking. So I want to just compel you before we close, make sure you're not trying to have people or things do what only God can do. Because one of the reasons he's our last resort often is because he's our only resort. And when we try to rely on ourselves or others or whatever those things are, and we finally get to him because there's no other choice, because those things aren't reliable. They're fickle, they're fading, they're rusting, they're changing. But God is only it. And listen, he offers to be your comfort in the midst of chaos, and instead we go to TV entertainment for that. He offers to be the security for us in the midst of the unknown, and we look at our bank statement or our insurance policies. He offers to be the joy in the midst of our mundane, and yet we look to our adventures and our trips and our vacations or our kids. He wants to be the affirmation in the midst of our doubt, and yet we run to social media and friends and significant others. He wants to be the wisdom in the midst of our confusion, yet we run to mentors or family. He can be the victory in the midst of our loss, and yet we go to house projects or work projects to feel a sense of victory. He wants to be the healing in the midst of our sickness, and yet we run first to doctors and medicine, and I'm for all those things. I love all those things. But again, our first resort should be God. Our first option is to rely on him. And so I have to ask you, what are you most prone to rely on that isn't God? What are you most prone to go to for security or comfort or excitement or affirmation or wisdom or victory or peace? Where do you go if you don't go to God? And I've got this. It's Gracie's bike. It's pretty solid. This is not mine. I don't ride this to work. But anyways, this is Gracie's bike, and it's beautiful, little princess thing. It's awesome. And she hasn't quite figured out how to ride her bike yet. She just turned 4 in January, and so she has training wheels. And you guys remember training wheels back in the day, right? And so she's getting better. Every time she rides, it's awesome, but it'd be bad news if she tried to ride without those things, right? Scraped up knees, lots of failed attempts, and a ton of tears, right? But the training wheels have kept her little princess bike upright for her to ride and enjoy, right? It's awesome. Really grateful for the training wheels. But we have a neighbor next door named Greta, and Greta's a few years older than Gracie, and she got to take off her training wheels recently. And Greta just flies through the neighborhood. Man, I'm telling you, she's like just zooming in and out, and it's just like her hair's blowing in the wind. She's unencumbered and uninhibited. She's just riding that thing, and I watch the way Gracie watches her. And she wants that so bad. Like she can't wait for the day she takes her training wheels off. She's pumped for that, to fly like Greta flies, to zoom like Greta zooms. And of course she wants that. We all want that, right? To be unencumbered by those things. And these training wheels, they're evidence that she can't do it on her own. These training wheels are unavoidable signs to the neighbors and to everyone around that she's young and inexperienced. These training wheels seem like a burden to her, and she's ready to fully learn and take them off. But isn't this a picture of us? And we busy our lives on the proverbial street in our neighborhood, and we look at other people and go, man, he seems more free financially, or she seems more free relationally, and they're less encumbered and they're less burdened, and wouldn't it be they just have control over their life, and they're less reliant, or whatever it may be, they're less tied down. And the reality is Gracie will take her training wheels off someday, but I'm telling you, there's something so pure about a girl that's trying to learn how to ride a bike with her training wheels. And she starts to pick up momentum, and she looks back, and she's like, Daddy, I'm doing it. And she's looking back. It's this sweet, intimate moment between the two of us. So it'll be a bittersweet day when we take those off. But what if we chose to never take our proverbial training wheels off as believers? Like, what if we committed to never stop relying on God to sustain us? And what if some of us put the training wheels back on? And we said, I'm not trying to do this thing on my own. I'll fall on my face over and over again. What if I know it feels embarrassing to have the training wheels on and people seeing that we're reliant, but if we didn't care because we're just hanging out with our dad in heaven, right? What if we went about our day as we make our coffee in the morning, or brush our teeth, or get the kids dressed, or show up to the oncologist, or drive to work, or check our phones, or drop our kids off at school, or go to the dentist appointment, or sit down for dinner, or lay down for bed. Not dead, but maybe dead too, because you never stop relying. But we lay down for bed, we looked down in all those normal moments, all the inconsequential, all the impressionable, and all the impossible. We looked down and we saw those training wheels, and with a smile and a grateful heart, we said, I'll never stop relying on God. Need him. I think that's where true life is found. Amen? Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for your grace and your goodness. Thanks for training wheels. God, I pray, just ask for your spirit in this moment. God, to convict us. So many of us feel like we try to live our lives to get away from any sense of reliance. We don't want to rely on anyone else, and so we just want to rely on ourselves. And I pray that you convict us and show us just the fickle nature of that it just doesn't work. It's not the best option, God. And I pray that you'd poke a hole in that. And I pray that you'd open our eyes, Spirit of God, to see our lack of control, to see our reliance. That even a guy like Warren Buffett is reliant on you to sustain his heart. He's reliant on other people. I just pray, God, you'd show us that we actually never stop relying, and you would compel us to never stop relying on you. And so, God, I don't know what that looks like, but I'm just praying that we would have this sense of every moment, I'm going to you first. I'm asking you first. You're my first resort, not my last resort. And so, God, go before us, do what only you can do, and remind us of your reliability and run us back to that over and over and over again. And would we be like those faithful children, a childlike faith that just rides with you, our Father, with those training wheels, and we're rocking it, and we're excited because we are relying on our Father, and we're trusting you. And so, God, move us, help us rely on you because you're reliable. In your name, amen.